Good evening. My name is Michael Goodson, and I am the curator at the Contemporary Dayton. That's not my full title, but it's the only one I'm comfortable with. Actually, what I do is really just organize the shows here with the help of a lot of really great people, some of whom are in this room, actually. You know who you are. And tonight we're doing an artist talk. We're actually doing a conversation with Mychaelyn Michalec, whose work is behind us here, and for those in the room, we are amid her work. This is the show. Mychaelyn was born in Warren, Ohio, and has a BFA with distinction. I almost read with distraction, but that's my BFA.
It could be with distraction.
In painting and drawing, and a BA in art history from The Ohio State University, and an MLIS in Library and Information Science from the University of Southern Mississippi. I don't know what that is, so maybe we'll cover that.
Library and Information Science.
Okay. Oh, that's an acronym. Okay. Yeah. Okay. She has shown her work internationally and has been awarded residencies at the Vermont Studio Center in Johnson, Vermont, and the Sam and Adele Golden Foundation and Artist Residency in New Berlin, New York. That's a really good residency, I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We can talk about the Goldens if you want. They're wonderful.
Yeah, I've heard that they're like really incredibly gregarious people.
Yes. Yes.
And the Kimball Harding Nelson Center for the Arts in Nebraska City. In 2021, you were the recipient of an Individual Excellence Award from the Craft from the Ohio Arts Council, which I think actually was part of how this show happened, right? Some of that funding
A little bit,
went
yes.
into this show.
Yeah.
And your work has been published in Friend of the Artist and Create magazine and Art Maze, and there was a review of a two-person show called Femme Mansion.
Femme Maison. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
At House Guest Gallery in Louisville, Kentucky, and this was featured on NPR's All Things Considered, which is a thing I still haven't gone back to listen to, I'll confess to you, but I intend to.
Okay. I'll hold you to it.
You should, actually. But all that biographical stuff aside, I would actually like to start with a biography series of questions, which is basically, we know you were born in Warren, Ohio, but where did you grow up? What was your first most significant experience with art? And how, in fact, did you become an artist?
Okay, well, I was born in Warren, Ohio, like you said, but I actually grew up in Newton Falls, which is a very small town in the Appalachian northeast corner of Ohio. And I don't remember a particular significant moment of, I guess I didn't have a lot of exposure to art growing up. I mean, I think my parents probably did a little bit of taking us to museums, which I know a lot of kids didn't have that experience. We had like one basic sort of art class in our high school that you could take. Maybe there were like Art 1 and Art 2. So I didn't have a ton of experience, even though I liked making things. And it really, for me, it wasn't until college, when I was taking some classes, that I felt more connected to that than the actual major that I was in, which at the time was biology, believe it or not. So.
Yeah, that's always interesting to me when somebody who identifies as an artist, and that really is about the amount of time you spend making, in my opinion. That's really like the catalytic bit that defines you as an artist, how much time you're in the studio, for better or for worse. And I identify with artists who discover that late a lot. I mean, there is that notion of having been born an artist, and there are significant artists that believe in that notion and who have in fact given talks that I've organized that are sort of arranged around that idea. I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, I don't think, like, for me, it wasn't something that you could even imagine. Like, I would go to a museum and it was like old dead people had made these objects or whatever. It didn't actually occur to me that this was something that other people did that were contemporary to me. And I thought, like, really, if you wanted to do art, the only actual career path that I knew of was to teach art at a school. So
Have you in fact taught?
I have not. My mom was a teacher, and the one bit of wisdom she always imparted to me was, like, never be a teacher. Because she was like, oh, they just,
She was really in love with it.
She loved it, but, I think she could see, like, what was the writing on the wall as far as, like, everything that was going to be required that is beyond teaching, which is expected for teachers to do. And so if it was just teaching, she would have just done that. But it's so much more, as you know, anyway, with kids.
Well, it's always interesting to me for artists to have come to their dedication to making a little bit later, because I know that, like, that is also predicated on a shift in brain chemistry where you have a deeper understanding of what you're doing. So the notion of a born artist is not something I dismiss, but I tend to relate to artists that come to it a little bit later. And your art has actually, I know, gone through kind of a lot of changes. You recently showed me some really simple drawings that were kind of astonishing to me. The continuity of line in them and the simplicity of them, especially when I compare it to this work, which is sort of just really presents itself in terms of material, volume, texture, color. These were so simple. And I think actually I'd like to talk about that trajectory from what I assume is drawing to years of painting that probably was started with your time at Ohio State.
Right.
To what I guess is a more recent revelation about making that resulted in this show.
Okay. Well, in college, I was extremely intimidated by the other students. I came, like I said, from like a rural town in Appalachia. I show up there, and there are kids that took like Saturday classes at CCAD and had, they had select, ceramics classes at their high school, which is something like I couldn't even imagine. And even in like painting 101, there are people that are just like laying out their palette, and I hadn't even touched oil painting prior to attending school. So I feel like my process is very similar to what it was in college, in that like I found ways of making things because I didn't have that skill set like that everybody came to school with, of like rendering things and a lot of practice that I just didn't have. So the weird line drawings that you're talking about it's just part of my process of like converting flat images and having my hand on them, and then going from there to, it was painting, and now it's, textile, so.
I think especially as a figurative painter, you use flatness as a pretty major tool a lot of the time. You see it more, I think, in the paintings, and there's something about the way you use it that brings another element to the paintings, which is, and it's a funny painting tool, but it's comedy.
Yes.
Or a sense of irony that kind of pervades most of those paintings. It actually exists a little less in these works, because I think these came from a more dire moment that we all shared over this past almost 2 years. But the paintings are actually, the flatness is part of how they're funny.
Yes.
And I wonder, like, if when you felt confident in using that as part of your vocabulary as a painter?
I mean, I think just because I have an appreciation for painters who use humor in their work. I mean, those are some of my, David Humphrey, or even, I think, like, even though it's real dark humor, Martin Kippenberger. So I mean, I guess that's where that admiration comes from. I know I'm not, it's not exactly comparative to that, but I think that, those are artists that I admire, that I think about their humor in their work.
I've thought a lot about Alice Neel, too, when I look at those paintings, in part because they have a tendency, not all the time, because there's something funny about them, but there's something about the flatness and the gaze. And actually, gaze is a thing I really want to talk with you about, because I think it's prevalent in both the paintings, and then it's really prevalent in these works. But I don't know how you feel about the Alice Neel collection, but it's something, it has to do with the way you look at your sitter, if that makes sense.
That's probably true. I mean, I thought you were going to say something about the line and get compared for that.
Well, there's
reason
that too, I think, but I think it's all of that is secondary to the most primary element in painting, which for me is really not about skill sets or moving paint around, but rather about ideation and what you're thinking about, and really the quality of the attention you're paying to what it is you're making and looking at.
I mean, I think, such a big part of it for me is just sort of portraying these moments as realistically as possible, and not in that it's photorealism or anything, in that it's very, a blunt portrayal of, I think, my life. I meet my own gaze in the photos themselves, or in the works themselves. I think it's just a way of me portraying that emotion, and imparting that sense, like that omniscient sense that I am aware of being documented, but not everybody else is, and sort of, the idea of like documenting something that with the thing that I know is distracting everybody else.
And that gets into like the mediated part of it, the use of the smartphone,
Right.
As a tool for the gaze. I also want to say, in terms of, I think there's different ways to take apart the idea of the way you look, and I think gaze is certainly an overused word in terms of painting, but I think it's an apt word for these works. But the smartphone is both the main device for capturing the initial image, but also it is at the heart of the both gathering and division of people in these paintings. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's the thing that is bringing you together and the thing that's pushing you apart. And I think that's what's going on in all these paintings. It's the more I've lived with this show, the more I've realized that weird dichotomy of how close you are and how distant you are at the same moment.
But doesn't everybody feel like that? Especially during the pandemic. You are crowded into a room with, you may have been crowded into a room with other people, and yet, just sort of that hollowness and emptiness, and that comes with the sadness and the weight of the situation.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I thought the pairing with Nina, this is, of course, a thing I realized after the show was hung, so I don't take any credit for it. It wasn't smart. But what I realized is that they're both, most of the paintings in the show that Nina has made were made during the pandemic. And she has this completely different take on it. So hers was to go pastoral, and it's kind of these bucolic gatherings of what might be families. And I think the through line between the two shows is ideas of what family is. Hers are built families, but this is your actual family.
Right, and I think hers are idyllic,
Yeah.
So, and mine, I'm interested in realism in this sort of familiar relationships, because, that's what builds, I think, solidarity. I think there's a lot of pressure on mothers to create sort of a idyllic, picture perfect scenario, and then to portray that outward using social media. And so I, as a person that's kind of disgusted with that, wanted to portray the opposite and say, hey, I think there's a lot of pressures with motherhood today, as far as just the whole level of togetherness and idyllicness that we're supposed to be portraying outwardly. And so I think that, that's something that I wanted to, that I'm more interested in showing. And I think maybe that these are a little bit darker or heavier just because of the pandemic, and all the work being created during the pandemic.
They definitely take apart the idea of the fictive nature of social media, which is people essentially presenting this, I love this phrase, their best lives.
Yes.
It's actually a phrase I really have grown to dislike. Their best lives with their children in these idyllic moments, their best lives with their pets, for God's sake, in these idyllic moments. Everyone seems to be on a boat or on a body of water. I feel like I don't do any of these things. I feel like a kind of a schmuck that is walking around his house in his robe.
And I think those images are almost meant to make women feel bad about how they raise their children almost, because nobody can live up to the standards of, the standards are so high, as far as I've got to co-parent, and I've got to feed them organic food, and I've got to, I don't know, they have to sleep in my bed till they're 12 years old. And, I just think the standards have gotten higher, and women have gotten more critical of each other as far as how they're raising their kids. They're not even supportive of each other. So
I think that's all in these paintings, and it's really kind of fascinating to me. And it's actually ideas that have kind of deepened and grown on me. I think these paintings in part take on the pathological positive fiction of social media. And right down to the fact that many of the images of you are really pretty unflattering.
Thank you.
But they're purposefully done that way. I can tell that you've broken all the rules that people follow to take flattering pictures of themselves for social media. The camera is too far below your face, things like that.
Right. You're looking directly up my nostrils.
Right.
I have multiple chins.
And what do they? There's a word for that.
It's called chinning.
Chinning.
When you give yourself multiple chins and take a selfie. Yes.
I want us all to take a moment to chin, please, just so we can relate to what we're talking about. Chin at your own will. It's been interesting for me to see, and we actually edited the show pretty heavily. There was a lot more work made, and I think what we were going for was a kind of rhythm in the relationships in this room. But there's one image that I hope we show in the online version of this, where you're wearing the T-shirt that says Scarlet.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, the whole Scarlet Letter idea was a thing that was very interesting to me. But that one in particular, you are chinning very heavily.
Yes.
And it's monumentally scaled. I think it
Yes.
might be the largest work you made during this period.
It might be, yes. Yeah. I was kind of sad it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, it
What's
was
up
like,
with that?
why didn't it make the cut? I think that's a mistake. I suddenly realized
Quick.
we should have like crammed it in somehow. But part of it was I wanted to give things a little room to breathe too. And also, there's a part of me that thought that could be shown in another show and hold court there. You have a show actually coming up
At Roy.
at Roy G. Biv in Columbus.
It opens next Friday. So.
Roy G. Biv in Columbus next Friday. That would be October.
The 8th.
Might that painting be in that show?
It's not. It's actually, I decided to go a different direction, and it's a bunch of lumpy, fragmented rugs that have been assembled and disassembled, and it's a little bit different work-wise. Some of the same themes, but yeah.
I'm curious to see it. Actually, when we talked about the talk about a week ago, you showed me a few of those paintings,
Right.
and I think it's a really interesting direction to go in. It's less formal, for sure.
Right.
I think these are actually really formal paintings.
I think so, partially because of stretching them too, and so that's what I was just trying to experiment with as far as, rugs that hang on the wall but that are not stretched as paintings.
So let's talk a little bit about material and process and how that enters the idea of these paintings, because I know it's a substantive part of what they are.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, I felt like just the subject matter is something that is not like very critically considered, especially if a woman is doing, imagery about their own life, especially like a family life. And so it already felt to me like, to me, it's a thing that I do because I felt like it was the thing that prevented me from being an artist, is making these choices to have a family and to have kids. And actually, it stopped my studio practice for more than a decade. But so for me, I was like, I'm gonna make work about the thing that I feel like prevents me from being accepted as an artist, which is this life. And so when I was making the paintings, and I really do love paint and everything, but I was just looking for a way to kind of bring it like full circle domestic. Like, what's something that I can do to make them even more like about this realm of, just bring it more like through the gendered ideas of domestic life and domestic craft. So I spent like quite a bit of time like playing with a bunch of different media and craft media. But for me, like the thing that is closest to painting is the rug tufting, because it's a machine and can be fast and it's immediate, like painting is immediate. So that's just kind of where it came from. And I felt like, and this is about 3 years ago when I started doing it, and for me, I just, I couldn't paint and do this at the same time. I just felt like I had to throw myself like into it. So that's kind of where that started.
What is the range of material here? Because it looks like there are some, in this painting in particular, this looks like a really high-end yarn.
Yes.
But some of the yarn looks like the shag carpeting I grew up with.
Well, most everything is animal-based, so wool or alpaca. And, this is probably a mohair, which is why it seems like so fuzzy and ethereal. But yeah, I think some of the shag look comes from, cutting the loop pile and making it look like that 70s carpet that we both grow up with.
Yeah, it's actually it's a really romantic texture and material for me in that regard. I grew up amid actually a lot of fabric artworks. Some of them really strange, like a plush relief of JFK that hung in my house. That we would actually I'm pathologically, I grew up Catholic, and we would put the palms behind that instead of the crucifix.
We
on
had
Palm
a lot
Sunday.
of the 70s style crafts, the God's Eye.
Yeah, we had God's
macrame.
eyes too. So this, I think, actually, and it's not that it's consciously drawing on nostalgia from the 70s, because that's not the pervasive feeling either, but it's in the DNA of these paintings, which I really think makes them kind of powerful.
Right. I think, partially just because I feel like we grew up with that, so maybe not for everyone, but yes.
I know that my friend Tim Rietenbach, who's an artist that lives in Columbus, is, and hopefully we'll show this, but I'll point to it for the crowd in here. He is in love with that plush remote. To him, that was just the most brilliant thing. And you've actually done a lot of plush devices lately. I mean, they exist in a couple of these paintings, because the smartphone is almost a character in this narrative.
Yeah. So, in my or if you're talking about the work that you saw in the basement, where I'm starting to do screenshots of actual text conversations that I had with my family during the pandemic. And so, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Like, as far as So I've just been experimenting with a lot more. Just moving away from the figure a little bit, and adding those sorts of things in. So,
well, the device again is like it's an ancillary family member almost. How is your family feeling at this point about being photographed so much?
I don't know. Well, some of them are in the audience. I think they have accepted it now after, at first it was very covert, so they didn't really see it happening, and then it became that they knew that that's what the work was about, and they just kind of let it happen, but they would throw up these protests I better not be in that, delete that, I don't want to be crying in that photo. And I was like, you'll be okay. So, or sometimes I would pretend, I hope my kids aren't listening, I'd pretend to delete it, and then I'd pull it out of my deleted files.
There you have it. The secret is...
I mean, it's kind of what you have to pay the piper, so, I mean...
I'm actually fond of photographs of crying children.
Yeah.
There was a weird shop when we first moved to New York that had these flat files of just photographs that had been discarded, lost in the world, which is an interesting thing about this tsunami of snapshots that's only grown larger with the smartphone. But I would go through them looking for pictures, especially children crying on Santa's lap. So
those are good.
These kind of weird harbinger images,
Right.
And I feel like there's an affiliation here too to that. Although no one is crying, I don't think.
Not in these, but
In
I
any of
have
these.
done crying kid photos before, which they were certainly not thrilled about. Yeah. But I mean, I keep them alive, so they can they can pay me back with one photograph of them crying.
It seems fair enough to me.
Yeah.
Some of you probably disagree with that. So you're making, the work is evolving a little bit, and it's going to manifest in the show in Columbus. Mm-hmm. And you're getting ready to go yet on another residency. And I'm curious what you plan to make there.
I don't know what I plan to make there. I just feel like every time I get a residency, and then it somehow aligns with having a show. And so my plan for just being free and doing whatever always ends up evolving into figuring out the show. So I hope in this case it's just going to be I don't know, an experimentation out in the desert. So, yeah.
Do you know Allison Elizabeth Taylor's work? She does marquetry paintings, usually with desert landscape because she's from Nevada.
Oh, no.
These paintings remind me of those paintings too, actually, just in terms of like the way they're built. I like a built painting. And actually, I like paintings that are derived from kind of a domestic mise-en-scène, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So Fairfield Porter actually designed his home to paint himself in. So it was, every time you see a Fairfield Porter painting, you should be aware that he consciously made his house look like that ramshackle Cape Cod aesthetic because he wanted to depict himself in that universe.
I love Fairfield Porter.
But he was really, in essence, kind of miserable. He was Ray Carver miserable. You know what I mean?
Right.
What I think is interesting about these paintings is that you get ennui and you get kind of intense closeness and you get separation, but you don't get miserable. And it kind of feels like you love each other pretty fiercely, you know?
Yes.
And I'm almost uncomfortable with the depiction of that. It's like a really intimate thing to depict.
Sorry, I don't know how to respond to that. Yeah, I mean, yes, it is an intimate. You mean like some of the sleeping things? I just feel, yes, it's intimate, but also it's, I think just part of the idea of, gendered labor and emotional labor. For me, it's not so much about intimacy as it is about, clearly what's happening behind, behind the scenes. I mean, they're just, during the pandemic, so many women had to quit their jobs because, just the level of care that was needed at home. And so part of these sort of intimate scenes for me are kind of about, reflecting on that.
Is this a diary of this now approaching 2 years of tumult for you? Is that the way it reads in part for you?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, it is a narrative of that time period. And and I think maybe that the images are what they are, were selected by you, because they reflect that time period more, so.
The ones where you have embroidered yourself in kind of seem like an active empowerment. I've noticed that they tend to be the Holly Hobby ones a lot.
Probably because my hate of Holly Hobby.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your hate of Holly Hobby. Can we talk about that just a little bit?
I just think it's so strange that during the 70s, with women's empowerment and everything, that everyone was let's dress like women on a prairie. And it was so popular at the time, and I remember getting Holly Hobby gifts and stuff. And then
what's really strange about that is that I think it all comes from the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House books, which actually present women as much stronger.
That's true. So when I did do research, it was the prairie style dress was actually a working woman style dress.
Right.
Because they weren't so corseted and formal as women on the East Coast, because they actually had to be working. But yeah, it's a strange sort of feminism.
Well,
So,
Ma.
Yeah.
That was the character's name, as I recall, would slaughter the wild pig that Pa had brought home, turn its bladder into a balloon for the girls to play with,
Right.
And then the girls would be delighted to be fed the fried tail of the animal. These were not delicate women.
No.
But again, it mirrors the distillation that occurred within popular culture of that stuff. Somehow Americans have a tendency to turn things like that into the dumbest thing imaginable. And there's a comfort level with that, and I'm really curious about your embracement of that irony in that body of work, which really is, like, for me, one piece. I think it's interesting that you made it into one piece.
Yeah, I feel like it just wasn't something to be separated. I mean, I feel like it's something that it's like a lifelong project. It could be, built upon and expanded upon.
The Kathy one kills me too.
Yeah, I remember that. That was like, in the newspaper on Sunday morning.
Right.
I never got the humor because I was so young, but yeah, that Kathy one in there is.
I mean, the running joke with Kathy was that she had this kind of weirdly damaged relationship with her mother that
Right.
was, she was completely guilty all the time.
Yeah.
It was a woman living, kind of a tortured woman that we were all laughing at. We weren't laughing because Kathy is in fact not very funny. But I do love the one. I think the installation is punctuated by the Kathy piece.
Yes. I'm glad you have a favorite.
It's not my favorite, but I kind of love that, it's included.
Yeah.
How many more are there at this point?
I mean, I forget how many are out there. Did I say 63?
Yeah.
But I've collected a few, but I haven't gone,
I think it's the perfect foil to this work too. Like, that's the thing that occurred to me. Actually, again, not until the show was installed. That it's another look at domesticity that is a little horrifying and a little clarifying at the same time.
And also distilled through popular culture.
Right. Are you a child of popular culture? Is that the...
I mean, I'm a child of divorce, so I spent a lot of time watching TV growing up, so I'm probably pretty privy to a lot of that thing, because of that.
I think TV enters this too because we all kind of grew up in this realm of half-hour resolution. So the sitcom was predicated on resolving everything in a half hour, generally speaking, sometimes an hour.
Right.
They weren't serialized because you had to get on to, the show where Martha breaks her, Marsha breaks her, Marsha breaks her nose or whatever.
Right.
And I think this is part of that. They manifest a kind of weird American mentality about how life is supposed to be, which again is manifested in social media as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing I feel like, making strange, open-ended sort of narratives. And, I'm a big Raymond Carver fan, so, yeah, I think about that when I make and title the work as well. So.
Yeah, the titles seem pretty Raymond Carver.
Yeah.
And Ray Carver was, he was not a happy guy.
Yeah, no, but interesting. I mean, I love his work for like its rawness and its just, just very plain way of saying things. So, we're getting a hand signal.
So on that note, on Raymond Carver, of all things, I'll tell you, I once named a dog Raymond after Raymond Carver. Not a happy dog. Kind of a miserable dog. Don't do that, is my advice to you all. Let's take some questions if you guys are up. And there is actually a microphone right here. So if you walk up to this microphone, the whole world will hear you. Don't let that throw you.
Don't ask me anything hard.
Were you exposed growing up to crafts, needlework, textiles, or yarn?
Yes, my great-grandmother helped raise me, and she was Ukrainian, and she did Ukrainian cross-stitch. And my mom actually taught me how to embroider. I think because my mom, the way that she grew up, she had to sew a lot of her clothes when she was first married. She never showed me how to use the sewing machine because she thought it was too traumatic, but she did show me how to embroider. And I feel like, knitting for me was something I did when my studio practice was suspended as sort of, it was just like something, to do to keep me sane and also have like kind of my own sort of project that was also a, creative outlet in some way.
Which part of this work is made of alpaca?
Is what? I'm sorry?
What parts of these works are made of alpaca?
Alpaca. Well, most of it is, I would say, most of it's wool. I think there's a little bit of mohair. I don't know that there's too much alpaca.
You said something about alpaca?
Oh,
Or llama or something?
Oh, yeah. Llama is mohair.
So the llama
So,
is the
yeah.
pink?
Yeah.
Okay. You need to find vicuña. Vicuña is a smaller version of the llama, and their hair is very delicate, very expensive, and is supposed to be very beautiful.
I don't know if I need more expensive. I mean,
I know.
some of these are between 7 and 10,000 yards of yarn, so they're already where they are at.
The llama is expensive enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, come up to the mic and we can hear you.
I don't think I need a microphone especially, but in the artwork here to my immediate left, it's titled with a phrase which is the last line of the poem Ozymandias by Shelley.
That's correct.
And a standard high school or junior high teacher would usually say the theme of this poem and its last line is simply the vanity of human wishes. That's the ordinary standard variety. But of course, this phrase also taken by itself, apart from the poem, is an expression of the concept of extreme distance. So I was wondering if you were interested in relating distance to the painting or vanity, or how did that come about? Some of the other titles don't have other artworks don't have instantly recognizable literary titles.
Yeah, so with that one, I think, yes, I was thinking about the major themes of that poem, and it was because usually when you have this poem in high school, they usually have like a tiny illustration of a sort of toppled bust, like, disintegrating. And that kind of reminded me when I was making the piece of my husband actually sleeping in the background, reminded me of that poem. And, the major theme for me of the poem is that nature is eternal. So I just, that's why I chose that particular line in particular. So yes, you have decoded it.
Yeah, that was a great question, actually, or a great comment turned into a question. Any other questions?
When we came to the opening, people were wondering who the people were in your photos, especially since a lot of it was during COVID, and they were wondering if a lot of these were portrayals of yourself or friends, family.
So I work by taking cell phone photos, and so it's always just my immediate family, my husband and my 2 children and myself. And then especially during COVID when nobody else was coming into the house. So, yeah, and I mean, while it is a portrait of, my immediate family and narrative, it's, I feel like they're general enough, the situations. I think we've all experienced sort of, these situations where one person is on the phone or, one person is sleeping in the same room, sort of that closeness, but also disconnect.
Are they usually portrayed like that when it's not, when you're doing work that's not COVID? Still?
Well, so before COVID, my work was fairly similar, I would say. It was similar in that, but I think it probably focused more on my children. But now, as they've gotten older and have disappeared more from my view, it's become, I think, a lot more about myself and also my husband, and just like the changing nature of the family relationship. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out. This is actually a really great crowd. Thank you for wearing your masks, and we were quite honestly, during this time, programming these sorts of things is a real crapshoot.
Right.
You don't know if people are going to venture into the world just yet, and so to see a full room of people is really kind of nothing short of life affirming for me, because so thanks very, very much. And we have another talk coming up. God, who in this room knows the date? It is actually Sarah Swinar, who is in our video room. And by the way, I think that's a pretty good pairing to your work,
I think
too.
you did an excellent job of pairing that with that work.
Because in her work she talks about a quick history in a single thing, soft texture hits me here, it appears here and here, a soft misogyny becomes this kind of mantra in the thing, which is really just her cataloging things that she obsessively buys on eBay. But
I actually think the piece is better with that sort of being murmured in the background,
yeah, it's really
because
funny.
it's adjacent to the video.
It's funny how that phrase, a soft misogyny, kind of bleeding into the space, even selfishly when there's no one in here, has been a really edifying moment for me. But I would say to you that the whole show has been an edifying moment for all of us here. And thank you. Thank you for making the work. And thank you for showing it here with us.
Thank you.
And thank you.